Well, I think we put in a lot of the improvements, certainly from the last time I was here to now. And in terms of parent engagement, which I guess is one of the things you're asking, when I first came on board, I remember the CECs being, to some degree, they just met, and some came and some didn't come. So moving the CEC presidents to Saturday meetings and also giving them specific responsibilities. One of the things I've asked them to think about this year is enrollment improvements that we needed to do. Because we have structures in place. It's how they're used that matter. I think also with the CECs, we asked them to start looking at diversity issues, which I know is something that's very close to both the mayor and I, but without any mandates. So, for example, you have a CEC president in District 13, David Goldsmith, who's done an unbelievable job of getting the people in his community to talk about what should this look like and how does it look like in our community, because it's a community-based decision-making. And for any of you who have been following the press, I sat on the PEP under prior administrations, and you knew what the foregone conclusion was going to be on any vote, because it was very much everybody did what they were told. And I'm not saying it's bad or good, I'm just saying that's what happened. We go to our PEP meetings after having spent hours of discussion, after having the PEP members going and visiting the schools that are on the agenda, and we change our mind occasionally based on parent input. So I do think the system is there. I just don't think all the structures may have been utilized to the degree they should have been. I inherited a parents department that was really more a pro forma, and one of the things we asked Yolanda Torres, who's the head of the parent engagement office, is to go out in the community and ask different communities what do they want more of, and based on what they've told us, they want more English classes, they want GD classes, they want cooking classes, it's going to depend on what they tell us they want rather than us telling them what they need. And I think that's a major shift. So the structures were there. They might not have been utilized as much as they could have been. We put out publications now on a monthly basis for new teachers, for parents, for principals. A lot of our communication strategies is letting people know in as many ways as possible. And actually with our P-Notes, which is actually going out today, we put them out to everybody, CEC presidents, city council members, anyone who wants a copy of what's, at least on my mind, gets it every single month. So I do think our communication and our work with parents has really been strong and will continue to get even stronger. And we always listen to recommendations from elected officials.
Again, Chancellor, I thank you so much, and I just encourage you as you have these conversations up in Albany regarding the extension to give us that kind of input on what we can possibly do to improve the current structure to, again, increase the roles of, again, certain interest in education.
I would say the one thing is that I am going to come back, certainly to the state legislator, on several issues, which are legal issues that we could use more help with. And I've discussed this with the state commissioner. We need help in terms of our CTE programs. We want to increase our CTE programs, and a lot of the reasons we can't. Okay.
We stay away from the light switches in the back, please. It's a little annoying.
Okay. And a lot of the legislation, and I think that's the role you guys play that's very important, requires changes. We can't get teachers for our pharmacy program. We can't get teachers for our health programs because there are certain things in state statute that keep this from happening in an easy way. So definitely that's a role that all of you can play. One of the things I'm concerned about, some of our major shortage areas are for our dual language expansion is teachers who teach another language, and I have a lot of teachers who want to teach in New York City, but they don't have reciprocal licensing. So if you're teaching in Texas, which is where I'm getting a lot of requests from, there's a surplus of dual language teachers, but they can't teach in New York City because they're licenses. So there's a lot of things that we can sit down together and say as partners, what could we do better to make some of the things that are, actually stumbling blocks to our work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just so everybody knows and put it in perspective, the state contribution to the educational system in the city of New York is $9 billion. We're not talking about small change here. So when we discuss what's going on, we have an oversight responsibility, which we will adhere to and we will put forth. So I am pleased that our members, the list that I have established right now is Senator Croce, Senator Golden, Senator Peralta, Senator Stavitsky, and Senator Perkins. And Senator Feld, obviously, will fit in. I'm going to go left to right, whichever order. We'll get to everybody.
Biologically, okay.
You're in the middle, right?
Everybody will get a fair shot and a fair chance to ask questions, and we have other panels to go, so if we can keep our questions concise and if we can keep our answers as tight as we can, then we have a chance of getting out of here before midnight. Senator Croce.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Golden, for allowing me to jump ahead, as I'm going to have to leave early. But, Chancellor, I appreciate your appearance here today. I want to dovetail off of something that you raised and then something the Chairman raised initially. First is, as a former chief executive of a small, third largest town in the state of New York, when there was an initiative important to the residents of my town, and in my role as chief executive, if the legislators in Albany wanted to discuss policy with me, I got in the car and I drove to Albany. If they wanted me to come back, I got in the car and I drove back to Albany. I checked ego at the door, particularly when it came to the welfare of the children and the families of our community. So I would just say that in this case, we are talking about, as you have raised, and certainly your focus is on the families and the children that we're talking about. It's worth the chief executive coming out and appearing. It's an indication to the legislature about the importance of the issue to the chief executive. And something that the chairman raised was a security. Of the 32 persistently dangerous schools in the state of New York as rated by State Ed, 27 of them are in New York City. And so when I hear about young kids arming themselves with weapons on their way to school, it's because it's not just they're afraid of something in the school. It's from their house, from their home, to the school, there's an issue. And inside the school, there's an issue. It's not a spontaneous action that a kid decides to arm themselves. So I'm concerned about some of the security questions that have been raised. I was wondering what the school system intends to do, or the city intends to do, to ensure that from that young person's home to the school, on the streets, that they feel safe, and then once they're inside that school, they feel safe, because the parents' expectation is when they give their children to the school system and they enter that doorway, that they are safe and in an environment conducive to education.
I want to be very clear that at this moment, the state and the city do not use the same template to give us safety statistics. And actually, the commissioner and I have been talking about how do we equalize that, so when we use numbers, we're both using the same set of numbers. Crime has gone down in New York City schools almost 29%. And I will tell you again, I visit schools all the time, and I particularly have visited most of the persistently dangerous schools personally. And one of the schools on that list is actually one of our gifted and talented schools. So I want to be clear that sometimes it's the incident itself, that because the incidents have point systems, and what the point system will bring up is sometimes for one student and one incident, it increases the number. So we have to be very honest about how we evaluate these schools and what constitutes a crime. Having said that, even one incident is one incident too many. One of the things we've instituted also with the NYPD, because a lot of these incidents unfortunately happen on the way to school or on the way home, we've started increasing what we call safe corridors. There are many schools in our city that we know are in particularly unsafe neighborhoods. So we now have a system where at dismissal time, there are extra safety officers and police department personnel to actually have students, when they walk what they call the safe corridor, watched. If we have incidents, I'm thinking one in particular that we just started about 2 weeks ago, where there were some gangs in two schools, and gang activity is one of the issues that raises the safety concerns in neighborhoods. We now have a special unit that we work with NYPD just to put in those neighborhoods. We have increased school safety agents in some schools, but more importantly, I think, we're starting retraining school safety officers. How do you de-escalate issues? How do you anticipate an issue even before it happens, which is possible? So I do think our schools are safe. I certainly go into schools all by myself. People are always shocked. I walk in a building all by myself. Where's my entourage? I don't take an entourage. I really feel that our public schools are as safe as they can be. But there's always room for improvement.
Thank you.
Senator Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chancellor, for being here today. And thank you for the good work that you do in the school system. It's a difficult school system, but some of the questions that I asked the last time are going to be very similar to the questions I'm going to ask today, so that there'll be few surprises here. yeah, I still believe you have to be an MIT graduate to traverse your computer system and your technology system in trying to look up schools, what money goes into the schools, how that money is divided, how much money a student gets in each one of these schools, how much money goes into the construction projects, what are the overruns on the construction projects, and why is there more of a focus on these overriding these projects. And one I'm going to go specifically is going to be PS 201 in Brooklyn. I know that Mr. Malley and Mr. Gonzalez are doing their best. I mean, it's 2.5 years. We're going into a third year for reconstruction. You could have built the school by the time we finish renovating the school. There was a revolution going on in my community over this, and I have to find out, how do I find out when this is going to end? What does this actually cost us? And how would I find that in a computer? And how can you help me on that?
Well, that is a challenge, and it's certainly, if you want to ask me what is one of the challenges that I haven't really solved yet, that is definitely one of them. Our website leaves a lot to be desired, certainly for this century, and it's something we're working on. I would say also we are very transparent, but getting the information is not as easy as the transparency once you dig it up. One of the things that I think that I can honestly say is that this year we're working with my chief financial officer and the mayor. No school will be budgeted at less than 87% of fair student funding. That's across the board throughout the city. Our lowest right now is at 82%. No school will be less than 87, and our hope is that within a year, all schools will be at least at 90%. So that's one of the things in terms of getting services. The other thing is in terms of, and you're certainly one of the most overcrowded districts, where do we find space? And thanks to many of the elected officials and parents and everybody, real estate agents, we are really looking for space that we can either lease or build. And one of the things we're looking at in your particular district is how do you convince parents to cross the other side of 3rd Avenue, which is a problem. We know where we have the space, but parents don't necessarily want to go to those spaces. And the other big issue that we have, and this is true in your district, and it's true certainly in areas of Queens, and some parts of the Bronx, where we have TCUs. We have several schools that we wanted to move, but in order for us,
The TCU.
the temporary care units, it's the mobile,
Trailers.
the trailers.
You don't want more of
And
that.
a lot of people don't want the trailers, but if we're going to get rid of the trailers, we have to place the kids temporarily someplace while we build, because a lot of our schools have very large schoolyards, and we can build schools there. I'm going through a situation right now in Brooklyn, but where do you put the kids meantime? So there's a lot of things, but in terms of specific numbers for specific schools, this is still a work in progress.
Those trailers, we definitely don't want to go backwards. Kids were falling through the floors on these trailers. These trailers were a disaster. They should not be in existence at all. And whatever we can do to get kids out of trailers, we have to do that. Now, I'm one of the, this may be an old school approach, but if you build it, they will come. So I do believe that you have to build them. I don't care where you build them, you have to build them. And you have to build them with STEAM, and you have to build them with STREAM programs. You have to be able to give the kids of the future the opportunity to stay, live, and raise their families here, and we don't have enough for that. And I don't see that in any plans, and that's sort of a real serious problem.
I totally agree with you, and this is something we're working on. We have buildings that are over 100 years old that just put wiring in them for air conditioning is a monumental job because they don't have the capacity for the wiring. So this is not something I'm going to tell you we are really greatly successful at, but it's certainly something working. I was in one of your schools this week, and the principal wants more outlets. So because they're not used to, when the school was built, it was not built for the technology of today. So that is part of the work with, computer science for all. We want to make sure that we put the support services in schools that we need to get that done.
If you could bring one of our kids in from the schools, they can build a better tech program so we can easily access that program, so we can break it down by district, by school, by account, what money is going into that school, what programs they have. I think we got some of the best kids in the entire country going to our schools. So I do
I love
believe
that
there's no
idea.
reason for this not to happen. This is the 21st century, we should do that. Moving along, overcrowding. I sat with the administration years ago, 14 years ago, and they told me, what do I got to do to reduce the overcrowding? We did it. I put 8,000 new classroom seats in District 20. Guess what? We went to a meeting, most overcrowded school district, District 20. I just can't, is there a plan for emerging communities, new immigrant, emerging communities coming in, and what is our plan as a city to deal with them in education, transportation, but not so much. Your goal is education, just the education portion of it.
I think this is one of the places, very honestly, that having a committee of people from the electeds and people from school construction and us, and then some educators and some superintendents at the table, particularly the three most overcrowded districts, 20, 24, parts of 10, and having a real discussion, because this is a very big problem, and no one person is going to solve it. The other thing is, and because this is something I now drive around the city, wherever I see high-risers, to try to figure out, are they one bedroom, two bedroom, three bedrooms, because that's, well, that kind of tells you they're going to be children, because although Williamsburg grew dramatically in Brooklyn, a lot of them are one bedroom, so you can kind of say, well, maybe there are going to be singles. But the other piece of this is that the explosion of newly arrived immigrants in certain parts of the city was totally unexpected, and many times they're not reported. So it's like in your district in particular, there are apartments that you pass by or houses, you assume one or two family houses, where in reality maybe 6 families are living in those. So we have to get smarter of how do we count these families, and many of these are the families that don't report who they are to any authority.
We have illegal conversions going on in my community where you take a 1 or 2 family home and you turn it into 5 or 6 families. And that's going on. So the city knows this. We all know this. So we have to be able to do is come together as a unit, as a city, with the building department, with the city education department, with transportation, PD, FD, and believe it or not, our hospitals, which are impacted as well, to make sure that we get the best services for the people coming into our community. I don't stop anybody. I want to make sure it's done and planned correctly to make sure that we do the right thing and that the people that live here deserve the housing, and get the best education they can possibly get. And we are really, you're doing an excellent job educating, but unfortunately we're losing a tremendous number of our kids to out of state. We're losing to Texas, to California.
North Carolina and
because
Pennsylvania,
programs.
two biggest states.
Pardon me?
North Carolina and Pennsylvania,
Well,
two of the biggest states where we're losing.
so and the other issue that is the pre-Ks. Obviously, we entered into pre-K, and which is the smartest thing. Great idea. Very costly idea. You couldn't figure out that money. If I asked you to sit down here, we could sit here for 10 hours. We're not going to figure out where that money came from and how that money is being paid back. That's number one. How many kids got to get into the system? That's another issue. And how many kids are left out of the system? And how many kids are being moved around through the shelters into different communities that are also impacting those communities? What is co-locations doing to the overcrowding? And how are we making sure that charter schools are not hurt by this? Is that a lot of questions in one question?
It is, but let me try to take one at a time, and maybe, Ursulina Ramirez can answer that. First of all, one of the things that I think would be helpful for everybody to work together, and we've started doing it in a small way, is that new developers always ask for some kind of easement rights. If you're going to go up higher, what can you do? I think they should do early childhood centers in their buildings. Having pre-Ks in buildings that are going up are a win-win for most developers. And I'm thinking of one we've done particularly well, I think in Dumbo, where the developer is actually giving us pre-K sites, so that means those local public schools don't have that. And I think they should be giving us space for schools. There are some in Queens that are doing this already, but maybe this could be part of the overall plan to do this. I think you have to look at the expenditure on pre-K 2 ways. I see the expenditure on pre-K as an investment. If you have an extra year of school, and particularly our students who start school with not speaking English, and they are able to go to kindergarten with much more skills under their belt, the system and the city is going to be better off in the long run. I think in terms of the co-locations, I have to say there are lessons learned. And one of the things that actually we've been discussing is how do we get a much more focused approach to co-locations where everyone is well served. Like I said, I went yesterday to a site, a Success Academy and Seth Low Middle School.
That's my district. There's
Yeah.
tens of thousands of kids on lists waiting to get into these schools, and they can't get into them. Go
But
ahead.
again, it's what are the things that are in common that the schools could share? Where were these things like after-school programs and things like that actually make sense? But I think the other piece of this is also, in co-locations, does it make sense to put 3 middle schools in the same building or 3 high schools that they can share resources? AP for all doesn't mean every single school has to have 5 AP courses. But if you have 5 high schools, and I just did this in the Bronx, and I said to each of the high schools, you have a history class, you have an English class, you have a math class, how do you then parallel teach and be on the same bell schedule, which is somehow or other a horrific idea for many people, so that you can actually go into each other's classrooms and take classes in other classrooms. After-school programs, if you unify all the after-school programs, kids have more choices. So I think we need to talk a lot more, and I think co-locations is one of the issues. we really want to have more discussions with communities on what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what is an underutilized building versus overutilized building, because the Blue Book from the past wasn't working, and we now have a new way of looking at space, but we need, that really probably could use a little bit more refinement.
And Senator, I just wanted to quickly answer you. You made a comment about new capacity within your district. And last night, just so you know, the Panel for Educational Policy voted on the amended capital plan with $800 million in new seat investments, including some in your district, because we have heard from community members about the growth of different neighborhoods, whether that's from developments or from students living in temporary housing elsewhere. So we have made investments, and specifically to...
I thank you
Yep.
on one issue.
Oh, yeah.
You did for me in Manhattan Beach, which I think was very good. I have 3 locations at that. I have a one shelter, men's shelter, and a family shelter. That would have destroyed my school over there, PS 22. And thank God you did the right thing there.
And I do want to note that we're doing a better job of actually working more closely with the Department of Homeless Services to talk about how we are coordinating and working together. In addition, the mayor made an investment of $10 million to really support kids in temporary housing and the collaboration between the Department of Education and DHS, because we do recognize there's an issue.
Sorry if I'm talking fast and putting
Oh, no,
a lot of
please,
questions.
go
because
ahead.
A lot of members here want to, and I have, believe it or not, I have several hundred seniors waiting for me at a town hall back in Bay Ridge. So I have to try to get as much out as quickly as I can. And I think it's important for you, the media, for this panel, so the proper decisions are made as we move forward. So what I need to know is I wish I had some of those schools that had 100 kids in them. I got my middle schools are 2,000 kids. My high schools are 4,500 and 5,000 kids. You know, so when you break them down into 3 different academies, I think you're almost forced to break them into 3 different academies when you have that many kids in a school. Maybe I'm wrong there. And how many? Go ahead.
No, I mean, one of the schools that I'm particularly proud of in the city is Fort Hamilton High School.
Doing an excellent job. You have an honest program there. They have that
5,000 students, but
Right.
yet she has an assistant principal in charge of each academy in that building. They were
Right, that
one of the
works.
first schools I invited to go see Hamilton because of the work they do, not only in the academics, but in the arts. So I think each school has to be evaluated on its difference. Is it working? Is it working? Like I said, it was too small. I believe in small high schools, but there have to be the right small schools serving the right purposes.
Well, I got to say that we need to be able to focus, and I think there has to be more communications. And the mayor here has to, I believe, lead here in getting us not only that we have meetings within each borough or with the legislators as to a plan, but each community board on a quarterly or at least every 6 months, we should have a meeting with those community boards, with the building department, with the different city assets to make sure that we're planning correctly and that there are some changes coming up, that everybody in the city is aware of these changes, and what are we doing as a single unit to bring that together, where we have the overcrowding conditions, we have illegal conversions. How do we stop the illegal conversions? How do we balance the system? And how do we bring down the overcrowding in our school districts by finding the properties that you need and to find the least properties that you need so you can go forward and give the best education?
I actually think that bringing a lot of people together by borough is a great idea. Somebody had mentioned at the last meeting, and I already asked my intergov to start thinking about it. The other thing, as based on a different meeting that I had a few months ago, we had our first meeting with the community planning board's education chair people about 3 weeks ago, and it was so productive that we agreed that we were going to have these meetings at least 4 times a year.
Good.
And this way, they can tell us, because they're not congruent to school districts, but meeting with the community planning boards also gives us, and also I asked them who they wanted to hear from, and they all asked school construction authority, someone from enrollment. So the more conversations we have like that, the better.
And the growth of the schools, obviously, getting the best outcome, the best product that we can possibly get. We have to, and to get those kids to go across and to go to where these schools are going to be built, is obviously the STEAM, the STREAM,
Absolutely.
the gifted and talented, the AP courses. But we're looking down the road. I don't want to lose, a generation of kids when it comes to STEM and to STEAM and to gifted and talented. Some of my communities are very upset with the gifted and talented because there's not enough programs in our districts. You get more problems with that in other districts?
Now, what we've tried to do is increase the amount of Richmond programs in every single school. And I was just, again, one is your school, 112, Louise's school.
Yep.
That's where Commissioner Bratton and I went. And I asked her how she was doing that, and she says what she's doing a pull-out enrichment for the students who need extra support in that area. So I do think that in terms of, we're trying to serve the needs of kids at the top, the bottom, and the middle all simultaneously. And I think that is something we're really working on through professional development, but I'm happy to discuss this further. But I do think of what we're thinking of doing in the Sunset Park area in particular is going to be very helpful.
And because of time, EIPs. Our EIPs are down, I understand, on some of our kids, somewhere around 40% of the
IEPs.
programs they should be getting, they're not getting. Obviously, we all have large EIP programs, and we might got to make sure that they have the best possible opportunities for success. And believe it or not, a lot of kids getting great education, but there's not everybody. My son is not taking it. My son is out there on his own because of the process that you have to go through, the process of going through the state, having to go to court every year, and then, of course, not getting the services that are required that you're supposed to get is another layer of an insult, actually, to that family that struggled to get those EIPs and can't get what they need for their kids.
Well, I think we've made a lot of strides on this, and I think, Senator Felder can also testify that we're working very hard on this, but I also want to tell you that we have increased our number of speech teachers, we've increased the number of OT teachers, we've increased the number of clinical psychologists. These are all very important people in the whole IEP process. So if you don't have the right personnel, you also don't have the correct services. The other thing I will tell you that we've tried, and this is where I think pre-K is going to be particularly helpful, because we were doing what we call Turning 5, analyzing students before they came into now we're catching kids 1 year earlier. We have the Turning 4 programs and the Turning 3 programs, so that we're able to analyze what students need prior to. Here again, something we need to work even better at is where we log in this information. Our CSIS needs some improvement. And I think one of the things we've understood very well this year is that special ed has to be a top priority. I've always been whatever job I've ever had, one of the things that I've made one of my top 3 priorities is students with special needs, because I believe those are the kids who need extra support. So I do think we've done a good job. I think, like everything else, that particular one, more to be done, but we've put a lot of extra resources this year. This budget has a lot more money for special ed and for both, and District 75.
Well, in closing, I want to say thank you. And I want to, again, focus that we do these quarterly meetings with our community boards, with our community, so we know what's going on. And we do them with a unit, a city unit that's got buildings, everybody at that table, so we know where we're going. And, of course, I think we should do it with our legislators on a borough-wide approach. And the mayor's got to be at some of these. And I know you're in conversation. I would imagine you're in conversation with the mayor on a regular basis. Or when do you brief with the mayor?
Absolutely,
Every
at
week?
least once a week.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Those weekly meetings are scheduled?
Yes, I mean, depending, there's always an emergency and we reschedule it, but the reality is that we do meet once a week. And we have teams on both our sides who meet with each other, so there's a constant conversation back and forth.
Senator Peralta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, I just want to say that I'm looking forward to our meeting that needed to be rescheduled yesterday. Thank you for waiting. But today, we are here to talk about mayor control. And first and foremost, I just want to say that I think you're doing a terrific job as chancellor. But today, we're here to talk about mayor control. And the issues here that have been brought up by some of my colleagues is the fact that this is such an important issue, such a top priority for the mayor, and yet he's not here. He's chosen to be at radio shows and not be here at this hearing. And I get your answer when you said that you were up in Albany for a whole day and you were at meetings and you testified. But as you know, 1 day of testimony, 1 day of meetings doesn't move things in Albany. In fact, they don't move things anywhere in City Hall. So I think that if this is such a top priority, I agree with my colleagues that the mayor should be at these hearings and should be personally answering these questions. But be that as it may, we will move on, and I will ask you some of the questions that I would ask him. So over the last 2 years, how many times have the full PEP the panel for education policy denied a proposal or contract referred to it for its approval by the DOE.
Ursulina has the exact number.
Yep.
1 second.
I will tell you just, one of them in particular, they asked us to revise and to take back, and that was the Amazon contract. And the Amazon contract was not supported because it did not have provisions for blind students. And we went back, and because of our purchasing power, we were able to get Amazon to redo the entire contract and provide Braille services through Amazon, not only for our students, but nationally. So I think that was a big step forward in terms of how we look at contracts, and our contract subcommittee on the PEP is particularly vigilant. In fact, they look at every single print and bring to our attention the issues they want to discuss. Ursulina?
We actually altered 5 proposals based on the panel and the CEC's involvement. One was actual complete vote down by the panel, and the others were revisions or withdrawals. And actually, currently, and as of last night, we're engaging the panel members and the communities on several different co-location proposals that we push back for a couple meetings to continue to engage communities. And those are scheduled to be voted on in June.
Okay, so 1 in total that has been completely denied and 5 that has been sent back for revision.
Sorry, 1 that was voted down, 1 was withdrawn, and the other 3 were revised.
Okay, and that one that was voted down, was that revised?
No. The one that was voted down, we did not put back forward to the panel.
Okay, good. You know, PEP is an issue that we, as legislators, are discussing in terms of what the makeup will look like. And is it working? I mean, these are some of the questions. Is it working? Is there enough input by the parents? Do they actually have enough say when it comes to moving issues forward? And one of the concerns that I would like for you to address is the concerns that I've heard at meetings. Is the PEP just a rubber stamp for the administration? It's a concern, so I want to bring it up, and I want to get clarification on your side and your angle and what factually happens. That's why I'm bringing up this question.
I would say that this PEP right now is a lot more independent than it would have been 3 or 4 years ago. I sat on both. Remember, I was deputy chancellor under the prior administration, and there were seldom pre-meetings. This PEP meets prior to every hearing 2 or 3 times, particularly when there's a contract to be discussed or a co-location. For example, yesterday's discussion on the co-locations, which is why we put them off for a while, almost every single PEP member had gone to visit the schools that were on the co-location site. So they actually go, they look, they interface with other people, and they come back with suggestions based on their school visits. So I think that is really, it's a very active PEP, very carefully selected to represent different interests. There's one PEP member who is very involved in special needs and has a special needs child, and every time there's a special needs issues, we ask her to take a stance on that. We have another PEP member who's very engaged and involved with English language learners. So I think the PEP members, to a large degree, other than the ones that are chosen by the borough presidents, remember there are 5 representatives, 1 from each of the borough presidents, so they certainly come with a voice based on their particular borough and what they have been either instructed to say or to ask or to think about. So I think it is a very fair representation. I will tell you, they do a lot of talking among themselves. When they ask for more information, they've asked for people from my department, like they've asked Milady Baez to speak to them. They've asked Corinne Arello Anselmi. They've asked Lorraine Grillo to speak. They asked me to make available to them people that can give them more information. So I think it is pretty independent. I think also, obviously, mayors do want to have their own agendas to some degree. So I think putting it on there. But in terms of anyone who's gone to any of our PEP meetings, and last night was one of them, and parents get up and they talk and they say what they want to say, they are listened to. I want to be very clear. They are definitely listened to, but listening and agreeing are not always the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things. So in terms of, and parents email me all the time. One of the reasons I do the town hall meetings, and I want to be clear on this, and I didn't know this when I started this job. When I went to my first town hall meeting, and I believe it was in Queens, they gave me these cards that people, or it was Staten Island actually, gave me these cards of questions people had. So I took the questions and I started reading the questions and answering them right on the spot. And all of a sudden, there was total silence in the room, and the CEC president, I guess, told me, you don't usually answer the questions here. I said, well, how do they get answered? Well, someone calls them up or whatever. I have gone to every town hall meeting in every district. I have not missed one district. Some districts I've been to twice and answered every question that within an hour was asked of me. And in that particular one, the ones I didn't get to, I called that Saturday. I was new on the job. I didn't have as many things on my head as I have now. And called parents at home. And one parent in particular hung up on me. I said, this is the chancellor. I'm having a question. Want to answer you. And she hung up, and I called her back. And she said, stop playing games. I said, no, this really, really is the chancellor. I said, you asked a question. Oh, my God. So I do believe in that. I was a parent of public school kids. I expect the respect to be shown to everyone in the system. And I do my town hall meetings with my own translation. I will, there was one meeting where the translators didn't show up, and I spoke in Spanish. I think it's really, really important that we're out there, we're public servants. I take that very, very seriously. And I think to some degree, how you evaluate mayoral control is also, who does he choose as chancellor? Mayor de Blasio could have chosen anyone. I mean, I'm sure he interviewed a lot of other people. But he chose me, and I think he chose me because I'm an educator. I am my own person. We don't always agree on everything. I'm very happy to say, I think we should do this versus this. And I think that's an important way to evaluate a mayor and mayoral control. Who's the chancellor? I represent him, certainly under Joel Klein. Many times I went out and represented him at many meetings, particularly parent meetings. So
Well, I appreciate that, and I think that he did make